Hey guys, this is Ernesto. Welcome back to another Monday Critique. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Monday. I'm having a wonderful Monday. Today we have two awesome images to critique, and I cannot wait to get into it. So after this intro, we'll jump into it. If you guys want to submit your image to be critiqued, please join our Facebook group. It's called Fine Art Photography and Modeling. In that group, I created a specific thread where you could submit your images to be critiqued. Hey guys, welcome back. So we're gonna get straight into it. So this image was submitted by this gentleman. Thank you very much for submitting your image. Let's get into it. So the very first thing that we always start out with is light. So in this particular image, the image creator utilized natural light. Now the natural light in this image was coming in from camera right. When the image creator submitted this image, he did mention that he was kind of using a tunnel light in this particular image. So that light was being really directed and focused on the subject by coming from camera right. Now, from a lighting perspective, I think overall in this image, I think the lighting is fine with respect to the subject. I just think that we just needed a little bit more distinction between the subject and the background with respect to the light. So just a little bit more a definition between what's on the subject and what's on the background. So I think from a subject perspective, the light on the subject and the light on the background is very similar. So with respect to the light, I would have liked to see a little bit more light on the subject and less light on the background. So what I would have liked to see in this image with respect to the lighting is that the lighting on the subject, as far as the exposure on the subject, right now I think is fine. But I would have loved to see the exposure on the background to be at least 1 or 2 stops less. And that would have helped with the separation of the subject from the background. Now, one of the ways that you could have achieved this is, bring the subject a little bit off of the background and bring it a little bit closer to the light source. Now, what that would end up doing is that would have forced you to then expose for the subject a little bit more. And then that background would be on a different exposure, which would be significantly less than what's on the subject. So that's what I would have done there, to just try to add a little bit more depth and dimension in this image by bringing a subject off of the wall a little bit. Now, another thing with respect to the subject, and I'll get into this a little bit more on the posing, but the lighting on the subject's face is not that well. So I'll make some suggestions with respect to the posing that it will help with that light on the subject face. But right now, if you look at the subject face, you will see that the subject's face with the light is not that great. So if you look at the subject face, right now, the light on the subject's face is okay, but it could be better. And I'll explain what I mean by that when I get to the posing. But right now, if you look at the subject face, you'll notice that the light is just not even enough. So when we get to the posing, I'll make some suggestions on how you could change your pose with respect to the light to help improve the light quality on the subject's face. But overall, pretty well done. There's one thing I forgot to mention about this image creator, which I think is pretty awesome. The image creator is 15 years old. So guys, anybody could do this. So, and he's off to a brilliant start so far. So great job with that. So now let's move on to posing. All right, guys, now let's move on to the posing in this image. So from a posing perspective, we have a casual pose here. I consider this more of a casual pose. And the reason I say that is because it just didn't seem like it was anything about this particular pose was intentional. It just seems like, you guys were out and you shoot in and you basically capture, a moment something that she was doing or attempting to do with respect to the pose, and you capture a moment here. So here's a couple of things I would suggest to improve on this pose. So the first thing that I notice is the subject's knee. Now, which is her left knee. Now, I've done this in the past, and that's why I noticed it the first time when I looked at your image, because when I went back and I look at my image, I was like, something is wrong here. Something is just not right. Now, when I was looking at my image and I'm looking at your image, the first thing that I notice with respect to her knee is that it looks or appears that her leg is amputated when you look at how it's currently positioned. So what I would say here with respect to her knee is that just drop her leg just a little bit so you could see, a hint of, the bottom portion of her leg, which is below her knee. So you could just see a hint of it so it doesn't appear like she is, amputated. So another thing with respect to the pose in this image, now I hinted about it with respect to the lighting, and that's the subject's face. Now, one of the things that helps me a great deal with respect to posing is the light. So whenever you're posing someone, right, the first thing that I look for when I'm posing someone is where my light source is coming from, specifically the main light source. And the reason I look for that is because I want to be able to say, okay, this is, well, to the subject anyways, this is where you're going to position your face, right? So if my light source and your light source in this particular case is coming in from camera right, what I want the subject to do is basically turn her face a little bit into that main light source. And what that will do for the subject is give the subject's face a good light quality, and it will be even and it will be nice on the subject's face. So, and then for you, from a shooting perspective, from a camera angle perspective, the camera angle that you have right now is fine because now you're going to be shooting the subject on the shadow side of the face, which is what you want because that will add depth and dimension to your image. So that's what I would have done with respect to the subject's face in this image from a posing perspective. Now, another thing that I would have done with respect to the subject's hands in this image, because right now our hands just appears to create like a little bit of a barrier between the viewer and the subject. So what I would have done here is, I would have played a little bit more with the subject's glasses or shades, not glasses. So what I would have done here is, maybe with her left hand, I would have asked the subject, bring her hands up to her glasses, shades. I need to stop saying glasses, shades. Bring her hands up to her shades, and just hold it a little bit. And as she's looking off to camera right, that would just basically make the connection between her hands and her shades a little bit more interesting as opposed to how it is right now. Now with her right hand, what you could have done is, if she had pockets, she could have put her thumb in her pocket, or she could just simply put her hands on her hips, and that also would add just a little bit more interest into this image than what it is right now. So just one last thing, I'm just going to circle back to the head just really quickly. The way the subject have her head right now, which is positioned to camera left, the one thing I just wanted to mention really quick here is that when you are positioning the subject head, or she is positioning her head away from the main light, then what ends up happening is you're going to get less light on the subject face. So just be cognizant of that, because if you get a good exposure when the subject is positioning her head towards your main light source and then she turns her head away from that main light source, what ends up happening is that you're going to get less light on the subject's face and it's not going to be as great. So always make sure that the subject is, positioning her head towards that main light source, it will certainly help with your shot. All right, so that's all I have to say with respect to your pose. Let's move on to the next section. All right, guys, now let's move on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, here's the thing. I'm not opposed to putting a subject in the dead center of the frame, as long as the environment support the story that you're trying to tell with respect to your subject. Then I'm all for putting a subject in the dead center of the frame, because it would just work for, you know, the story that you're trying to tell. So with respect to this image and the environment that's around your subject, typically what I try to do is I would try to put the subject either on the right side of the frame or the left side of the frame, because what you have here is just a plain wall, and basically you want to basically add a little bit more interest to your shot by positioning your subject either left or right. And the reason for that is you want your viewer to basically have something else to look at, as opposed to just going straight to your subject and that's it. You want them to basically read your image from left to right, just like they're reading a book. Read it from left to right. And in addition to that, what ends up happening is, if you were going to put this image in like a magazine or something like that, then you would be able to have like a negative space on this image to add text, right? And it's always good to, when, in reason, to add negative space to your images, because it just adds just a little bit more dynamic to the image and a little bit more interest to the image. So that's all I would have to say with respect to your composition of this image. But overall, for being 15 years old, man, I think you did an awesome job with your image. And look, do not stop, keep pushing. I'm sure you're gonna get better, and much better than a lot of photographers out there, because you are starting pretty young. And from what I could see, you are on your way to being a brilliant photographer. So keep it up, man. All right, guys, now let's move on to image number 2. So this image was submitted by this gentleman. Thank you very much, Damien, for submitting your image. Let's get into it. All right, so now let's jump straight into the lighting in this image. So from a lighting perspective, what we have here is a very dramatic image here. Now, there's a couple of things that I really like about what's going on here with respect to your lighting. From a lighting perspective, you're telling a great story here. And the story that you got going on here is that it's very mysterious, right? But there's some pluses and minuses to that, right? One, I like the story. Two is that I can't get a real sense of the full story in this image. And the reason for that is because I can't see all the details in this image. Now, doing a dramatic image, I mentioned this, I believe, on the last video or the video before. Doing a dramatic image don't mean that you have to lose all your details. You can retain your details in the shadow area of your image, and by retaining the shadow detail, it will just help tell the story a little bit more. So I would suggest in this image is to basically impose to try to bring up the shadow details in this image so that your viewers could be able to see a little bit more. Now, the one way to correct this when you're on location and you're creating the image is when you take that shot and you look at your back of your camera and you're seeing that all your shadows are being crushed. One of the things that you could do is introduce another light. Introduce another light into the image just to add just a little bit of light to those shadow areas, just to lift up the details a little bit in that area to help tell your story. So that's one of the issues that I have with respect to the lighting in this image. Now, another issue that I have is the main light that's on the subject's face. Now, that main light on the subject's face is a little bit overexposed. And it also makes the shot feels like it's, you know, like you use flash, like you could clearly see that that's what you use in the shot to help create it. So what I would say to you is drop your exposure a little bit on the light. If you like the exposure with respect to what you have with the camera, then you don't really have to touch anything on your camera. You just have to go to the light and drop the exposure a little bit on that light to help make this shot not so quote unquote flashy. Okay, so those are the two things or a couple of things that I have issues with respect to the light in this image. But overall, I really like the drama, the story that you're trying to go for here with your creative lighting process. So great job with that. All right, guys, now let's move on to the pose in this image. So from a posing perspective, I really can't see much of the image to critique this image from a posing perspective that much. The one thing I can say is that I do love the expression on the subject's face. I love how the subject is connecting with the camera. It's very strong, it's very powerful. I like it. But I can't really see the rest of the image, and I can't really see the body of the subject to help really critique this image from a posing perspective. But you know, you could get a hint of what's going on here by the fact that you could see the saxophone, and you know, the fact that you know that this person is actually, you know, a saxophone player for maybe like a school, you know, the school band, or you know, maybe he's part of some other band, but I think it might be a school band. But you know, you could get a hint of what's going on here, but you know, I can't really critique it much from a posing perspective. But great job with the storyline, great job capturing that wonderful expression on the subject's face. So that being said, we're gonna move on to the next section in this image. All right, guys, now let's move on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, again, we have an image here where the image creator put the subject in the dead center of the frame. And I think for this particular image, that works brilliantly because it's more of a portrait type image. And I really like that, you know, the fact that the subject is dead centered. I think that's totally fine. The only thing that's a little bit distracting for me, and I know you basically did this so you could get the, you know, the sun in the shot and whatnot, but I think the sun, in conjunction being so close to the subject's face, is just a little bit distracting, especially since the light which is on the subject's face, the main light that's on the subject's face, is supposed to be drawing the viewers to the subject's face. It just forces me, at least me, because you know, I'm watching the image, it just forces me away from the subject's face, or competes. You know, I basically looking at the sun and I'm looking at the subject's face. So from a compositional perspective, I would try as much as I can to help, you know, block that sun so the sun wouldn't be in the shot. Because, you know, from a, you know, compositional perspective, it's just competing a little bit too much with the subject's face. So, you know, one of the things that I do with respect to compositions on the day of a shoot is that if I notice that I have a really cool thing that I would like to do or try on the day of a photo shoot, is that I tried a cool thing. I try to see if it would work. You know, in your case, you try to see if that sun, you know, if you could get the sun by, you know, basically underexposing for the background and then utilizing your flash to help light up the subject. And, you know, you tried something and, you know, it worked for you. But what I try to do is, if I see something cool and I try to work with it, see if I can get it to, you know, come to fruition from what's, you know, been brewing in my head, to see if it can actually come up on the camera. So one of the things that I do is I push as much as I can, my subject and myself, as much as I can, to get that, you know, process that's in my head on the back of my camera. I push as much as I can, and once I get it, what I try to do is also try to get some different angles of that same shot, just in case when I go back and I'm looking at it on the computer that, you know, I don't say, look, yeah, it was cool, but it didn't work from a compositional perspective. So what I try to do is just get different angles, because what you originally had in mind may not necessarily look as great when you come back and you look at it in post. So just get options. It's always great to have options so that when you come back in post, you could say, okay, yeah, this was okay. The original concept was there, but when you get back into post, you could say, well, oh, well, this angle actually works a little bit better than what I originally had in mind. So that's what I would say to you in this particular image when you go out there and creating you know, other images, is that if you have that killer shot that you're trying to get, just get some different angles of that specific killer shot that you thought you had in mind, just so you can have some options. Obviously, you know your bread and butter shots when you go out and you create your composition, and you know exactly what you're going for, and you will get, you know, nail it all the time because you love that composition. But if you're trying to go for something really creative and different, always try to get a different angle of that, you know, creative thing that you want to create, just so you have options in post. So that's all I would say with respect to your composition. I hope that was helpful. Let's move on. All right, guys, now let's get on to the rating of these two images. Light, I gave this image a 3. Pose, I gave this image a 2. Composition, I gave this image a 2. Overall, this image received a rating of 2.33 out of 5. All right, guys, now let's get into image number 2. Light, I gave this image a 2. Pose, I gave this image a 3. Composition, I gave this image a 3. Overall, this image received a rating of 2.66 out of 5. All right, guys, thank you so much for submitting your images. I sincerely appreciate it. I hope you guys got a lot of information from what I had to say with respect to your images. And I hope the viewers also got some great information from what I had to say. Guys, if you found this video to be helpful, please hit that like button, and please put some comments down below and let me know what you think about my feedback, and if you have some additional feedback that's helpful to the image creators, please drop that down below so that we can keep this conversation going. And guys, please share this video with a friend or family or colleague that you think may find it helpful to them. Please share it with them. And lastly, guys, if you got this far in this video, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next Monday.